Live on Facebook. Hello, everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Catamas, and this is our special edition of Straight Talk with Scott and not Trish. Trish is on. She's actually, of all places, she's in Death Valley on a vacation. Go figure. We're going to do a whole Straight Talk episode on why Trish would go to Death Valley for a vacation, but not tonight. Tonight, we're actually talking about some really important topics. We're talking about addiction, recovery, codependence, how it all mixes. And I've asked three people that I have tremendous respect for to join me. You're going to meet them and they're going to do most of the talking. I'm just going to ask a few questions and pretty much let you get to know them. All three have a tremendous amount of wisdom. I have a lot of respect for all three. And let's face it, these are very, very challenging times. As a coach to a lot of people, and then through my Love Coach Academy, we're all observing how many people are struggling under the pressure of the pandemic, economic uncertainty, civil unrest, election uncertainty. And so it's natural that people that are vulnerable to seek substances, whether it's alcohol or drugs or other things, can turn to that, to check out, to feel relief. And we don't judge anybody here for anything that they do. We're all perfectly human. That's the motto of Love Coach Academy. We're all perfectly human. And sometimes we make choices that have hurtful consequences. And we're here to provide support for you or anyone you know that might be really struggling. One of the people that's on our panel who I'm really happy to introduce to you, I've had him on the show before, but not for a long time, and not on this show, is TJ Woodward. And TJ was my coach, to be perfectly honest. I went through a challenging time. My drinking got a little out of control. And TJ was referred to me, and we worked together, and he was just tremendously helpful. And I have the greatest respect for him and his very unique approach, which is conscious recovery. So TJ, take it away and tell us a little bit about conscious recovery.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I'm, of course, honored to be here, and I really appreciate the way you started us off by talking about what's happening in the world, what's happening in our country, probably what's happening in your home. You know, we are living, it's become cliche at this point to say we're living in unprecedented times, but we are living in times where, you know, the news of the last 24 hours, I'm thinking we never know what's going to come next right now. Right now, that has actually always been true. But for whatever reason, 2020, that seems to be truer than ever. So thank you. And just, it's a deep honor to be here with the three of you and be in this conversation. So very briefly, conscious recovery is a modality of treatment. It's my book, my workbook, and my system of care, looking at addiction in a new way. And, you know, for some of us, it's not a new way, but for many it is. And fundamentally, the most important principle of conscious recovery is recognizing that underneath all addictive behavior is a whole and perfect person. So much of the treatment, so many of the support groups, and a lot of the conversation that we hear around addiction and recovery ends up, you know, maybe unconsciously looking at the person as broken or damaged in some way. I understand that, and I also recognize what gets created when we view ourselves or view others as broken. Very well-meaning counselors and therapists are often trained to diagnose and treat, and the addiction paradigm is still part of the Western medical model, which says, what are your symptoms and how do I help you eradicate them? The issue with addiction, and this is a conversation I know the four of us are going to get more deeply into, but the addiction issue, or the issue with looking at addiction in that way, is when we only focus on symptoms and behaviors, there's no real healing that happens, right? That's why we see people, what we call relapsing or coming back to treatment 4, 5, 6 times. So the underlying deeper root causes, in my experience, are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. That's the way I've laid out conscious recovery, to look at how we can shift the conversation about from addiction treatment to addiction healing. And I know we can talk more about that, but a huge part of it is looking at ourselves and looking at each other through this lens of wholeness. And Scott, you mentioned all the things happening in the world, right? Um, the social unrest, looking at the issues of race, looking at our politics, looking at COVID, all the opinions, all the perspectives, and all what seem to be the struggles. What would happen if we each take a deep breath and look for the wholeness in each other? So I think that's the way I want to just open. I'm mostly just grateful to be here, and always, always grateful to have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. You know, when you were talking about 2020, I saw a great meme. It was a photograph taken through like the perspective of somebody driving. And you see through the front windshield a cow flying overhead. And the caption underneath says, normally I would think this was strange, but it is 2020. Like
Indeed.
anything seems possible these days. You know, I've got a section on gallery view because I want you to see both Heidi and Timothy, because they are both love coaches in Love Coach Academy. They do a wonderful show every Tuesday called Recovery Talk. And it's a free online show. And I really want, if any of you are really wanting to get ongoing, consistent support, these are two wonderful people to go to for coaching and for their show. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi first to kind of share with us a little bit about your work, your perspective, and how people, whatever you want to share on this kind of opening round.
All right. My name is Heidi Love. I'm here on the Big Island of Hawaii, and I am very honored to be here tonight and glad to be in this discussion with all of you. I always get so much out of group discussions and like to say that it's easier to see things in others and then apply them to yourself. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about a group, and it makes it easier to see ourselves and then also lets us know we're not alone. And I think in these times that we're talking about 2020, that's something that has come up for a lot of my clients and friends, is a deep feeling of loneliness and unrest, and what do we do and what's coming. And I know for me, I always say I like to name it to tame it. That's one of the things I say often on Recovery Talk. Timothy's probably heard it way too many times. But I know for me, one of my relational behaviors that I've identified in myself that is not a sober behavior for me is the got to know gene. And when I get that itch and I have to know, I don't do well. I get that investigator and I can get on crazy train. And so that's a behavior I don't engage in anymore. And I know we'll talk about a lot of these things, but I know right now for a lot of people, anybody else that also has that, it's very tickled right now, that have to know, got to know, and that unrest that comes from that. And I don't know why I was inspired to share that, but I am an addict in recovery myself. I've been in recovery for many, many years and have gone through multiple addictions. And I kind of define them as process addictions and substance addictions. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah, that's all I got to say right now. Glad to be here with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heidi, for being with us. And our other panel member, who again works a lot with Heidi, works a lot in Love Coach Academy. He's a very, very tender and wise soul. Thank you, Timothy, for being with us.
Really nice to be here. Again, if you want to find me, my website is www.earl-consulting.com. I've been working with families, individuals, and couples in a variety of areas for over 20 years, and started a therapeutic boarding school in Western Montana in 2001. And I would agree with TJ that approaching people as if there's something wrong with them and labeling them, and always looking at the fault and the symptoms and what's the best medication. I'm not against medications. But really looking at people as if they're broken or if there's something wrong with them actually does not move them towards empowerment and towards an awareness around their current situation and how they might move forward or shift or change or improve or make things different. And as I have gotten older, I've come in contact with some of my own addictive or compulsive behavior that I didn't know was there. And there are many of us who are I would say unconsciously, I love conscious recovery, unconsciously or unaware of some of our habitual patterns that can be in the area of addiction. And some areas we don't look are, golfing. And you might see, I've met many fathers who golf and work took a precedent over their families. And when they finally started to become aware of the underlying issues that were driving them to to the driving range to golf, they eventually were able to come more into them on their authentic selves, recognize that they really wanted to connect with their families and make major drastic shifts that no one thought was ever going to happen. Not the mother, not the son, not the daughter. So addiction is, I just want us to remember that it can be right in front of us and we don't see it. And that can be true with alcohol and other things that we think of as addictions. So that's my little piece that I would add to all this beautiful discussion so far.
Yeah, one of the things when people ask, what's the difference between love coaching and traditional therapy? I like to say that traditional therapists, God bless them, have spent many, many years learning how to diagnose and evaluate what's wrong with someone. And we take the approach that there's nothing wrong with anybody. We're just dealing with really hard stuff. We're perfectly human. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so kind of that is where I want to go with a question for each of you. And any of you can answer this in any order that you like. Obviously, it's common that we may be close to someone who is engaging in what we perceive to be unhealthy behavior. They're drinking too much. They're going too far in their use of substances. And it's always tender, especially if it's a close friend or a family member. How do you suggest managing that very delicate situation? And I'll open it up to any of you. TJ, I can't resist that smirk.
Well, I just was wondering how long we could be in the silence. I love the silence, so I could sit for a while and just see what emerges. This is a question that is often asked, right? How do I, support, or how do I, maybe it's even the conversation of how do I have a boundary with that, or how do I move out of judgment? And what I will say about it is possibly different than some of what's out there, right? I recently saw someone posting about tough love and essentially saying those two really don't exist in one. Is it even possible to have tough love, right? So that was one person's perspective. And when I read something or hear something, rather than going into I agree or I disagree, I'm like, oh, I wonder what's there for me to explore. So the idea that somehow we need to do something for someone else, I think can be an issue, right? Because, I know part of our title here is codependency, and that's a word that's, often used. For me, early in my life, I disconnected from the truth of who and what I am. I believed I was broken. I started carrying a bunch of shame. I thought the world was broken. There was something fundamentally wrong with me. And because I separated from my essential truth, from that moment on, I was looking to the world to try to bring me that sense of wholeness, right? And so we can call that addiction. The way I like to say it is I have my umbilical cord trying to plug into someone or something to try to feel whole again. Now, there is a reason I'm bringing that up as we talk about a loved one in an addiction, because am I looking to plug into, if they can just get better, I will be okay, right? And am I looking at them as broken? I'm very clear that this lifetime, I'm not here to be a parent. And so my heart goes out to parents, right? Because I think it's really easy, for example, to be concerned about a child, a teenager, or a young adult that's practicing an addiction. And it might be hard to hold them in the space of love, right? It might be hard to say, I see them as whole and perfect when, they're having legal problems or they're driving drunk or all those different issues. So there's something powerful for me to see in, can I unplug and reconnect with my true nature, reconnect with myself? And I think that is a very large conversation that applies to everything we've already talked about, right? Every issue in the world. Can I unplug from what's happening with politics and plug back into source? And so if I'm doing that for myself, then I have less of an agenda, whether it's a conscious or an unconscious agenda, that this person needs to do something in order for me to be happy. And I think that's a fundamental starting point, right? And it's not to move away from having any judgment or any codependency. It's to notice when I have it and then what gets created. What gets created when I view them as broken? Is it serving me? Is it serving them? What else is possible? Can I plug back into my essential nature and become curious? I have a new acronym that I'm using, and it's interesting times to have this acronym, but I am now studying to be a COP, which means curious, open, and present, right? So if I read something on social media, or if I hear someone say something, or if I notice I have a judgment about myself or another, I pause, I remind myself to be curious, open, and present, and just notice what emerges. So that to me is actually the number one thing. It might sound a little esoteric because it maybe doesn't sound tangible, but it's not really my job to fix someone. First of all, they're not broken. And so I think that for me is it's really the important first step.
Beautiful. I love that acronym. Curious, open,
Present.
present. Present. I had it and then I lost it.
You were so present. You weren't.
That's true. I was so present to be curious and open because that is really, really important, especially with so much divisive belief system stuff going on right now. Yeah. And one of the things I'm just encouraging everybody is please don't fight with anybody over a different belief system. Can we just make peace with the fact that none of us really know what as much as we want to know? We just don't know. And we want those answers and we can attach to belief systems. But if you find yourself fighting with somebody over a different belief system, no. Go straight to COP, curious, open, and present. That's beautiful. Timothy, Heidi.
I'll go. In my work with parents and adolescents, one of the first things that I like to teach parents and the adolescent, especially if I can have all of them in the room together or now on Zoom together, is that there's an internal compass in each of us that is our own, and that compass is what guides us to make choices, decisions. But to really use that compass, we need to learn how to be aware of how we're feeling, aware that maybe now is a time to pause because we're triggered. So I think there are a lot of steps to teach families, people, couples that are in relationship with someone who's behaving in an unhealthy, I don't really like that word, in a manner that is less life affirming, then we know that person, if they were in touch with their internal compass, they'd make a different choice and they would choose something more life affirming. And if parents can learn to slow down and be cops in the term that in the way that TJ just mentioned, curious, open, and present, and do nothing else, then that child starts to come up against their own internal compass, which might involve what I call healthy guilt, which is that sense of, oh, I'm hurting myself and I'm hurting people that I love. I don't want to do that. That's a healthy guilt. When it persists, it becomes shame and the sense of, I'm broken, I'm bad. We start telling ourselves the very thing that we perceive others are viewing. And at that point, usually our poor behavior, our less life-affirming behavior becomes reinforced, and we keep doing it and we can't stop, and we're in the addictive cycle. But before we get to parents going to tough love, really learning to be conscious and open and present, curious, and really allowing their child to express themselves, first and foremost, before there's any action taken. And in Heidi's work, which I've gotten to really observe, she has the 3 A's, which I'm just going to close with, which are awareness, acceptance, and then action. So you can see the same steps of, let's just all come into awareness. Let's come into acceptance of what occurred before, and most parents and a lot of people, loved ones, partners jump to, you need to do this, or we're doing this, or this isn't acceptable. And that reinforces something's wrong with me, I'm broken, and it reinforces the addictive cycle. So I really like how this discussion is playing out, but notice I'm staying away from anything like throw them out immediately. And yes, once we get to acceptance, we can start talking about boundaries. You know, I have a boundary around my car. You don't get to use it without asking me. You know, we can have boundaries around certain things that are really productive and healthy. And the last thing I would say is the hardest, which is really letting go of the outcome, or letting go of this idea that if this person gets sober, if this person changes, then somehow that makes me a better parent or a better partner or a better person. You know, so letting go of the outcome being a thing that allows us to pat ourselves on the back. I helped them get sober. No, everybody who does get sober does so through awareness, acceptance, and then making a new action, a new choice.
Thank you for all so many pieces of wisdom there. And yeah, you know, as a recovering rescuer, I really appreciate, especially what you said at the end there. Heidi, you're a mother, and I don't know anyone who loves her daughters more than Heidi Love. And so just how do you manage when, you know, your daughters or maybe boyfriends of the daughters are using substances and you being as committed to sobriety as you are? Any words of wisdom for parents out there?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on what we were talking about before it leaves my mind, and it ties into the question you just asked me. But when I work with couples, or really anyone, when we're experiencing someone else's pain, our often default is to fix it. And that happens for different reasons. It happens because, one, if we really love someone, we don't want them to be hurting. So our intention is, let me tell you what to do so that you can get out of the pain you're in, right? So that's typical what we want to do with someone that's hurting themselves or in an active addiction or hurting others. It's a normal reaction to want to fix. And also we do it, and we don't think too much about this, is because we're uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable with our pain. So let me fix it so I can feel better. And we don't often like to say that out loud, but I like to say it out loud on here because it's something to think about. We don't want to be uncomfortable. And if I fix you, I feel better. So that's kind of what I heard Timothy talking about, is bringing the focus back to us. And I did go through different things with my kid, and I also lived with an ex-husband who was in recovery and relapsed, and I went through his Vicodin addiction and then alcohol and then crack cocaine, and it got worse and worse and worse, the symptoms that I was living with. Also, the other symptom that I see in parents or in someone that lives with an active addict is and I say we because I also had to rope in my codependency, was the focus becomes them. It's so out there, and you know, the alcoholism and addiction is very in your face. It affects them, it affects other people, it affects health, it can kill people on the road. I mean, there's some pretty big consequences that go on with active addiction, or even in abusive relationships, which is relationship addiction. And Timothy and I talk a lot about codependency and love and sex addiction on Recovery Talk. The focus becomes the other person, and it's so chaotic, it's easy to lose yourself. So I love what Timothy said, bringing the focus back to yourself. You can be happy in the midst of a storm, and often addiction can feel like a storm. It can feel like a tornado. And also focusing, one thing that I love to tell, and this is also what I used with children or some of the things going on, is people will argue with someone that's actively using. And I like to separate, and this is kind of sub-personality work, but there's their healthy adult self, or there's their healthy teenager, or their higher self, whatever you want to call it. And then there's their addiction. And I'm like, if you're talking to the person that's an addict and you're talking to that voice that's in them or alive right then, you're not having a conversation with the person you want to have a conversation with. So that's also something to remember. You know, when you're talking to the sober person, you're connecting to the person you want to be talking to. And often if they're using, you're having a conversation that can sometimes go nowhere. And that is a whole thing I could talk on for hours. So I hate to throw it out there that lately, but it's something to ponder. And back to the question of parenting, what do you do? I mean, it's really hard. I think that was one of my hardest times when one of my daughters was struggling, and it wasn't with substance addiction, but what I would call a process addiction, a relationship that was very painful. And it's excruciating watching someone you adore, someone you want to have the best life possible, someone that you don't want to go through anything that you already went through, and you want to protect them from it. You know, I would say that love is the most important thing, love and acceptance of that person. I tried my best because I was so shamed in my addiction and lived in shame for years. I tried my very best, you'd have to ask her how I did, to not ever shame her for whatever choices she was making or for whatever she was going through. And just to give as much unconditional love as I could, and then also really caretake myself, because I could get triggered into obsessive thinking or wanting to fix. And that's where I have to take care of me so that I'm available for you. And I do want to say that we can't fix another person. We can't make them see their stuff. We can't make them go find recovery or get help. We can be there. And when they ask for it, be there to help, be well enough ourselves to be able to help or point them in the right direction. And it's been my experience that within your family, you're not the best person to help them. Someone outside the family is. That's just my opinion. It's not the law. It's been my experience in working with others as well, like when families come and work with me. And also when my kids have struggled, I do whatever I can, but I always pull in outside help as well.
Thank you. So many pieces of wisdom. So I'm going to kind of just riff to anchor in a couple of things after each person speaks. What she said about not shaming. Again, it's what TJ started us with, you know, just this theme of not seeing people as broken, not shaming. Now remember that the vast majority of people that are struggling with addiction of some form, and we all have some addictions. And for some of us, it might be Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream at the end of the day, which tends to be a little bit less, have fewer consequences than a cocaine addiction. But we all have our addictions, our compulsions, you know. I can't wait to see the next episode of our favorite TV show. In a sense, there's compulsive excitement about that, right? So we all have things we look forward to. Yeah, absolutely. First thing in the morning when I wake up, I reach for my phone, right? There's an addiction there, right? We all have it. We all have it. Thank you, Timothy. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's not shame anybody, because if most people that are struggling with an addiction or a compulsion that's having hurtful consequences on others, absolutely the last thing they need is to be shamed. And when they get shamed, the reptile brain is going to take over. They're going to go into a defensive posture, and it's just going to escalate. And you're really pouring gasoline onto the fire. It's radical acceptance of what is, finding that compassionate love, and then setting boundaries with compassion. Setting boundaries with compassion. And so I think that might be the next round. Any thoughts about setting boundaries in a compassionate way?
I just start by laughing. I so appreciate what everyone has said, and I really love the conversation. And one of my favorite topics is boundaries. But before I talk about boundaries or hear what other people have to say about boundaries, I wanted to touch on the beautiful things that have been said. And then my mind was like, and how do we do that, right? Like, how do I not shame someone, or how do I not judge someone, or how do I not go into fix-it mode? And the answer for me is profoundly simple. It's always within me first. I love Pema Chodron, and one of my favorite quotes of hers is that compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded, but between two equals.
Mm-hmm.
Only when I know my own darkness well can I be present with the darkness of another. And that could be light too, only when I know my own light well. And so if I haven't learned how to be present with myself and honor and acknowledge where I'm at emotionally, then I'm, as Heidi said, then I'm going to, want someone else to feel better, right? Because even in some recovery circles, we talk about positive and negative emotions, and I'm really curious about that, because what if there's no such thing as a negative emotion, right? They're just information. It's let me recognize that, as Timothy said, that's part of that internal guidance system, right? That's part of that GPS, is being able to recognize, oh, there's this emotion here. And the relationship with that in addiction is profoundly simple. I am using substance or having sex or shopping or overeating or whatever it is, checking my phone over and over again, because there's a relationship with my not being at ease or able to feel what I'm feeling, right? And so when we move into a paradigm of that's a negative emotion, well, if something's negative, I want to get rid of it. But that's addiction, right? I want to get rid of this sensation. I want to get rid of this. I want to change the channel. Back when we used to change channels, some of us are old enough to remember that. But to be present with what is, and to recognize and honor every emotion I'm having as an internal guidance system, when I can do that for me, I can do that for you. And so the boundary is never for the other person. And when I hear us talking about boundaries, I hear us, and Timothy, right? Like, I can have a boundary like, no, I'm not giving you the keys to my car. That one makes sense, right? So I have professional boundaries, right? When I work with clients in a treatment program. But the boundary I'm speaking of is what we often hear people say is, here's a line and you cannot cross it. But really, a boundary for me is, here's a line that I'm not going to cross, not because it's wrong for me to cross it, but I know what happens when I get across that line, right? I go into wanting to fix. I go into wanting to control. I go into thinking that you need to reach a certain place in order for me to be okay. So the boundary, if there is one, and I'm not a huge fan of the word, but I'll just to be transparent, because that's a wall, right? A boundary is a wall or a division. When I do clinical trainings, when I go in and train coaches and counselors, I talk about the energetic boundary being dropped, right? So a lot of times we'll hear people say, I'm an empath and I take on people's energy. And so I want to be curious about that and say, what if I'm also I'm also one with you. I have this shared humanity. Sometimes people will hear me say that I'm going to self-disclose, and I don't mean that. I mean, I'm going to be open. Again, we go back to curious, open, and present, and let me be in this shared humanity instead of playing a role. So I know those were a lot of different topics related to boundaries, but when I heard someone say the boundary is never for the other person, I mean, I remember just thinking, honestly, it was like, oh God, I have been perceiving it the other way for so long. And guess what? People just don't do it my way. They just don't do what I want them to. And getting that was profoundly simple, except for the 20 years that it wasn't. And then it got painful enough. And then I said, oh my gosh, I can't control anyone else.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you. I want to start reading a couple of quotes, and then we'll go to Timothy and Heidi. Daisy writes, labels, these are some of our people watching our show. Daisy writes, labels are useful so far as we are aware of their limitations and they do not become a vice, as with most tools. So I think that's very wise. Thank you, Daisy, for sharing that. And we definitely want to hear from more of you. We've got a lot of people watching. We've got 60 shares. So a lot of people are watching this. And I want to acknowledge that the majority of people who watch Love Coach Academy shows, especially mine, watch the replay. And especially since we've been shared out, thank you very much to our friends at the Sign Network who shared us out to about 50 groups and pages today. So if you're watching on one of those groups or pages, you can still comment or write to one of us, maybe in a private message, and we will answer your questions if you watch and it's not happening live. Timothy, We're ready for another dose of your wisdom.
I love this idea of being present with our internal patterns, which is my language for what TJ was talking about. And noticing that, again, these things become unconscious. We come home and we say, did you do your homework? First thing in the door, not, hey, John, how are you? What are you watching on that television? You know, mind if I join you for a minute or two and like check in and again, allow John to recognize, oh, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. I know I'm supposed to be doing my homework, but I'm watching TV. And just giving John that space with our loving presence, because we know we can't actually make John, how are you? And so I look at these as internal patterns, boundaries within ourselves that we can control around how we react to any given situation. And when we come to the how, I think this is true with everything. Learning, I'm going to cry, I don't know why. It's such a gift to learn to feel whatever is there. As TJ was saying, whether it's a sad feeling or a happy feeling or an angry feeling, to simply allow the feeling and to do our best to stay out of story or projection onto the situation, and to just sit with the feeling long enough to really get comfortable with the feeling. At first, certain feelings tend to be a little uncomfortable because we've been taught, quote unquote, they're negative. But even feeling ecstatic can be uncomfortable. And so as we learn to feel those feelings and be with them, then we get to a place where we're able to observe what's actually occurring in our field. And how do we want to interact with the collective field between myself, another person, or a room? In this case, it's these three people that I'm on the call, myself, four of us. I'm in relationship with myself. I'm in relationship with Scott, with Heidi, with now TJ, and relationship with all of them. So there's like, what is that, 5, 6 relationships going here. And if I can be in tune with my feelings, and I felt that sadness move through me, it was really also a joy, because it was a joy that I'm able to feel my feelings. Once I've done that, I'm able to come back and really see Scott, and I can see that Scott's got some things that he's thinking about and he's managing there. And I can see Heidi's right with me, TJ's right with me. There's no offense to Scott. There's no shame in that. I'm just noticing the field. And that allows me then to interact with it with consciousness, with awareness, rather than in my automatic patterns, which I raise my hand. I am often doing my automatic patterns with clients, with myself. And I love it when a client says, Timothy, you're not listening to me. Or Timothy, you don't see me. It really helps me come back to center and go, okay, I'm probably across that line where I'm in, I know more, or I'm trying to do this, or it's my responsibility to help this client, as opposed to really being with them and helping them to be, if I can, by being with myself, to be with themselves. And it's in that beingness, that feeling of feelings, that we get to what are the underlying needs. And then maybe we can start to talk about what actions one might occur. And it's a tricky thing, because my role is not to lead. But when you're seeing someone in suffering, we often move to, that's uncomfortable and I want to help them. And I really want us to know that suffering, this is going to sound very strange, is the greatest gift we have. Because it's our suffering that allows us to become more present with what's going on inside of us. And I could use cancer, I could use drug addiction, I could use a broken leg, I could use lots of different things, an emotional suffering. And I'm not saying that we need to suffer. I'm not saying, oh, great, suffer. But suffering points us into, oh, I'm suffering. Let me slow down. Let me feel what's going on. And if we don't, then suffering usually leads us towards addictive behavior, habitual patterns. So I think these internal patterns, boundaries are extremely important. And recognizing that my need to control my car because my son just takes it from me without asking, and he does silly things like drives his friends around and gets beer and wrecks it, that I can have a boundary for myself of, I feel better when I know that my son can't use my car. I feel safer. I feel more at peace. And so based on his behavior, he doesn't have access to my car. And it's a boundary for me, and it's also for him. Right? I'm kind of leading us towards maybe a different kind of boundary now.
You're muted, Scott.
I want to acknowledge, and I hope you don't mind, Timothy, that when Timothy talks about suffering and the challenge of suffering, he's recently gone through a very significant cancer scare and a very serious cancer that came through his body, and he's been in a recovery and a healing modality for quite a while now. So I just want to acknowledge that it's not just like a theory that he's espousing, something that he's been actually living and working with. So thank you.
Yeah, I can say for me, I'm not putting this on anyone else, that my cancer process has been a gift. Very challenging one, but it's been a gift.
Yeah.
And it's been a gift of presence, ultimately.
Thank you. Heidi.
I think that the topic of boundaries is so important, and it's a very difficult thing. It makes me think of, you know, if you have a child that's an addict and they're creating havoc at home, or it makes me think of what I went through with my ex-husband. And I love what TJ said, that boundaries are not to enforce on other people. And I've had so many people come to me in my counseling practice and say, I set boundaries and they don't respect them. And what that does for us when we set boundaries on somebody else and they don't do them, or they don't adhere to the boundaries we think we set, we become angry and resentful, and we blame and shame them. And so it is so important what was said, that and again, it's a vague topic, so I don't want to leave you parents out there that are sitting there saying, well, I have a kid, what the frick do I do? I have a kid that's stealing in the car, that's stealing my money and buying dope or whatever. Or for my case, you know, I have a husband that's got glass in his feet walking down the road because he smoked crack cocaine. You know, I don't really love living with that. So we do need to be real about those things. So how do we then have boundaries around those situations? And that's kind of where I got the 3 A's, like awareness, acceptance, action. And so I had to become aware of what was the truth. We want to deny and rationalize because it's really painful to live with that. And then we want to accept what our truth is about it. Can I live with my child driving the car if he's drinking? Can I live with someone that's using crack cocaine? Bring it back to yourself. Like, what is actually your truth? You may or may not act on that truth, but finding out what it is and accepting that that's just true for you. For me, I judged myself harshly. Like, I'm a recovered addict myself. How could I leave a man that has the same problem I have just because he relapsed? And I stayed in it for 2 years in hell because I felt so much shame, and I wasn't honest with myself that I didn't create a sober life to live in active addiction. I don't want to. And I had to get really clear about that with myself, that this is not okay for me. And I also had to accept, and this is something I want to throw out, if you're struggling living with somebody, whether it's your child or your partner or a loved one, that I thought he was capable, so I kept blaming him. You've been sober before, go get sober again. So what I realized is that we don't know if they're capable or if they're willing. Sometimes they're not capable, and we don't know why. We only have the choices we have at the time, and we don't know what someone else's choices are. That was his only choice, clearly, at that time. So I like to say, we don't know if people are capable or willing. So we can't control them, but we can get clear on what's true for us. And I really want to say this for parents, especially. It's really hard. And it was really hard for me in my marriage. I had to get really clear on what was true for me before I could enforce my own boundary. I can't enforce it on someone else. So I had to remove myself from the situation, which for me meant a divorce and moving out of the house. So of course, I'd rather enforce the boundary of you need to be sober to be married to me, right? That'd be a much easier boundary to have. I wouldn't have lost then. And so I had a parent ask me the other day, my daughter smokes pot. I told her she could only smoke it outside. She's smoking it inside every day. What do I do? And this is, again, a boundary issue. And I said, there's not right or wrong. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You need to think through the consequences. If you try to enforce your boundary of her not smoking in the house, it may mean that you have to move her out of the house because she might not honor the request that you have. And so that's what I say to parents and to anyone living with an addict. You have to really be ready to enforce your own again, I don't even care about the word boundary easy, but you have to enforce your own behavior to take yourself out of the situation or to be able to set that kind of consequence. So don't be setting boundaries you're not going to stick to yourself. That's what I want to say. And it's hard. It's so hard. Again, I gave you two hard scenarios. So after talking it through with that particular client, he said, well, I don't want my daughter to move out. And I said, well, you might need to work around acceptance of her smoking in the house. There's nothing wrong with you talking to her again and making the request and saying, you know, I really don't like it in the house. I'd really love you to only smoke it outside. I accept that you do it. But again, we can't control someone else's behavior. And it does get messy. And so I wanted to bring those things up because it's easy to say, don't enforce a boundary on someone else. But there's real things that we live with. And again, we have to be ready to do it for ourselves. And what is our own truth and what can we live with and what can't we? And if we can't, we have to take the action to be away from it.
Mm.
Thank you. I do believe in setting boundaries and making sure that they're not walls. So I call it boundaries with compassion. And I guess the two little tips I like to give is one, to make a bound, I call it a boundary sandwich. Lead with authentic reassurance that you care. Because what usually gets in the way is if we struggle setting a boundary or asking for what we want or need, we're afraid that we'll be seen as not a friend or not loving or whatever it is. So lead with authentic reassurance that we care, set the boundary, explain why that's what I'm needing, and then do the cop. Be curious, be open, be present to their response, to their discomfort, because they probably will have uncomfortable feelings. We've talked about that a few times, so there's no such thing as negative feelings. But there are definitely uncomfortable feelings. And part of life is learning to be present to uncomfortable feelings and managing our discomfort with their discomfort. Right? We've kind of, again, heard that earlier today. We got to manage our own stuff in order to really be present with the other. Otherwise, we go into codependence. We go into manipulating what we say in order to make sure the other person doesn't get unhappy or that they are happy. So learning to be present to what is, including our discomfort with other people's discomfort. So the three kind of topics were addiction, codependence, and recovery. We've talked a little bit about codependence and a little bit about addiction. Let's talk a little bit about recovery and each of our own relationships to personal recovery, perhaps, because that's probably where we can have the most impact, is talking about our own perception of recovery. So I'm going to go to the man who's got a big sign behind him that says conscious recovery.
Wait, where is it? Where is it?
Other side, other side.
Thank you. Oh, where is it? Where is it? Thank you. I just want to, just say, I'm so in love with all of you at this moment. I really just feel, my heart feels so open to the depth of sharing and the openness. And before even talking about my personal recovery, what was emerging for me as you were talking is beyond the conversation of boundaries is learning how to be, as we've all said, in touch with what I'm feeling. And perhaps the greatest way we can be in relationship is to know that and to authentically share that. I know Timothy talked about authenticity, and authenticity is sometimes is heard as I'm going to tell you the truth, but really for me it's like being really in touch with my authentic, my true nature, my Buddha nature, my essential beingness. And then also being able to, most of us, I'm sure, have heard about nonviolent communication, which is when you blank, I feel blank. And I actually dropped the first part. And now my intention is just to say something like, wow, I notice I'm feeling sad right now. And so when I'm able to be with that, then maybe it is less about the conversation of the behavior. And again, of course, it's easy for me to say because I am not a parent, and maybe in the next lifetime or the last lifetime I did that. Definitely not this one. I have a dog. That's as far as I can go with that. So personal recovery, I've been in recovery myself for 34 years from substance use. So I got sober when I was 3. No, I got sober when I was 20. So, could be considered young, I suppose. It depends, right? It's all relative. And my recovery has taken a lot of different paths over the years, right? What I recognize today is true recovery for me is about returning to that essential truth that I came into this world filled with so much joy and so much happiness. And then life happened, right? As Don Miguel Ruiz calls it, and I love this term, the domestication of the human, right? I became domesticated by my family, by my school, by boys don't dress like that, boys don't throw like that, all the messages. Our family doesn't have that, or we're not, all those messages. And they were so counter to my innate knowing that love, we talked about love earlier. It really is about that. It really is about knowing that love is a frequency, and it's the frequency and the vibration that I came here, as knowing that no one had to teach me that love is who I am. I inherently knew that was innate. And if that's true for me, I am guessing that's true for each of us, right? And so recovery really is about unlearning. Really recognizing all, as Rumi says, it's not my job to seek for love, but to look at all the barriers I put on top of that or in the way of experiencing that. So, as much as I might think recovery is moving towards something, it's really returning, what I call the great remembering, looking at the BS belief systems that I inherited. We look at unconscious biases. We look at, I've been talking a lot about confirmation bias lately, right? Like I have a core assumption and then I see it everywhere. I create reality based on my core beliefs. I believed I wasn't lovable. I believed that I was broken and that I wasn't worthy. And I was literally walking around, and that started from age 5, 6, 7. And then it was concretized in my unconscious. And I walked around vibrating that frequency and choosing relationship after relationship unconsciously to confirm the belief that I was unlovable. And I thought it was them. I thought, why do I keep attracting unavailable people? And then I realized at one point, oh, wait, I've been choosing them. And not from a place of shame, but from a place of, oh, that frequency, that core belief, that core assumption, unconsciously recreated it in my life over and over again. And that can be really painful, but it also is true freedom, and Timothy talked about suffering, and sometimes it's the loss of something, a divorce, a bankruptcy, all those things that I've been through where I have the opportunity to really look at what's true, right? Really get down to who and what I really am that's beyond those core false beliefs. In conscious recovery, I call addiction a brilliant strategy rather than a coping mechanism. And I've had all kinds of brilliant strategies. And usually they were trying to manage a belief in my own brokenness. And at some point I had to recognize that I needed to walk through that and really care for the little child within me that didn't get the attention, right? And that's not a blame. It's just, you know, what I was taught about emotion is go to your room till you can stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about, or boys don't cry, or all the messages. And so learning how to have love and compassion, you know, my nephew, when he was 2 years old and he was melting down, I realized that if I just got down on his level and looked at him in the eye and asked him what was happening, he was able to express that and calm down, right? That was 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. And that's what I do for myself now. Allow myself to feel it, move out of the judgment, and then just be open to what I'm experiencing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I love that bit about the brilliant strategy, because I can certainly relate to the various addictions I've had in my life. All started with the first time I did it, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And the second time and third time were pretty great too, right? You know, and so both with myself and when I'm working with people, just recognizing, okay, what's that pleasure memory that we've got? And we got to learn, at least I'll speak for myself, I have to learn how to acknowledge I've got this incredible pleasure memory that is remembering how wonderful that was, how awesome it was, how good it felt. And then can I also remember the consequences and acknowledge, okay, there's this pleasure memory that's driving me, but can I also remember the consequences that have happened? And that's part of my approach that I have to work with, and it's challenging sometimes. Timothy, recovery. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'm going to use the sex word a lot, and I think that often we don't, and we ought to. Most of us were conceived during a wet spot, and then we're born from a wet spot, and it's a natural part of life. However, at an early age, I personally was exposed to shame and guilt by opening the door to my parents' room, just like any little kid, and dad saying, get out of here, what are you doing? Or something like that, scaring the crap out of me. And I could tell they were doing something under the sheets. They were in a weird position. They were naked, you know, I mean, we're pretty smart at 8 or 7 or however old it was. And that created this thing around whatever it was they were doing. And then this exploration at probably too early of an age of what were they doing, being curious. I went and looked through all their books and found books with pictures of people making love, and very graphic, probably way too advanced for that age. And then that led to finding Playboy magazines in my friend's dad's basement and taking those home. And then that led to taking pictures of my friends and getting caught. And then the shame and the guilt really started, where dad would say, go get those pictures you had of because I took pictures of Playboy bunnies as well. And he'd make me show them to their friends, and they'd all laugh. And I didn't know why they were laughing, but I felt internalized, again, that story process that TJ was talking about. Oh, there must be something funny about me, or I must have done something funny, or then it grew too wrong. And then when I explored intercourse at a very early age, didn't feel good, didn't feel right, it was way too advanced, felt a lot of guilt, and the church came in. Gonna go to hell was the story I heard, and I believed that. Children have a strong imagination. So every night I went to bed and prayed to God, please, if I die, don't make me go to hell. And I let that go for about 2 years. I think I was 10 when I told my mother and 2 best friends. My mother did a pretty good job. She said, you're not going to go to hell. You didn't do anything wrong. And I really trusted her and felt a lot of the shame and guilt lift off of me, and a lot of my obsession around sexuality was lifted. But 2 of my friends at school decided to tell everybody. And I remember 30 kids, seemed like maybe 16, felt like a big group around me calling me a pervert. And, you know, eventually that faded, and I didn't really call myself that. But what happened later in life was when you combine also losing not losing, but my father leaving the family system at 9. And I share all this because I think some people, especially hopefully men, can start to resonate, since men use pornography at a very high rate. Women are using it more now. And when I talk about use, I'm meaning every day, either using it to get aroused, which is an addictive state that we get into. And now it's no longer about the pornography. It's just about getting the hit of arousal, just like cocaine. And a lot of people go, he's addicted to porn. No, he's addicted to the arousal state. And some people are using it, men, as a visual in order to ejaculate. So I got into all of that probably at like 13 on, using pornography to ejaculate, not so much just to be aroused, but somewhat. And it became this soothing, brilliant strategy, right? And it worked so well, but there was all this guilt and shame. I had to keep it really private, keep it hidden. Only like 1 or 2 friends could know about it. And it was an objectification of women, and it narrowed what beauty was. So it's a very complex thing, sexuality, and the use of sexuality to compensate for discomfort or feelings or thoughts of being inadequate. And I'm sharing again quickly this story to illustrate that our society supports it, and yet it's under the table and makes it acceptable. And I don't want to make it unacceptable. I'm not trying to shame pornography. It's more about if your usage or your sexuality is something you can be open about and honest about, and the people that you surround yourself with are accepting of your open, honest behavior around sexuality, and it's consensual. Now we're moving out of guilt and shame, and we're moving into behaviors that are wonderful. We're sharing intimacy on a sexual level with other people, and it's not something that you're ashamed of or that you're hiding. So I'm not here to say, this is bad, that's not acceptable, it shouldn't be that way. I'm here to say, no, the journey I'm on, and I'm still in recovery, and I'm still working hard at this, is healing the wounded little boy and really loving him and letting him know it's okay. You encountered things that you just weren't ready for, and your parents weren't ready. They had guilt and shame around sex. They transmitted it to you. Then society transmitted it to you. And your beautiful calling in this lifetime is to be open and honest and positive around sexuality, and to share that in a healthy way, and to make sure your relationships are honest and consensual, and that you're not doing what I was doing when I was in that unconscious state as an adult male, which was turning each lover into my mother, trying to get her close, getting guilt and shamed, it polarizing, falling apart, behaving in a very unconscious, really hurtful way to myself and to others. And it took literally being knocked to my knees for me to finally go, wait a minute. In all these last relationships, especially the 10 years up to this moment of realization, the only common denominator is Timothy. And it's my lack of internal understanding of my patterns around sexuality and my own boundaries for myself and for my own health that's hurting myself and others. So thanks for letting me riff on all that. And I'm still in support, and I still have people that I check in with and that help me with this. And Heidi is a big part of that.
I think I'll go straight to Heidi then.
Timothy and TJ, loved hearing each of you. I'm touched. My mind is kind of reeling of what would be helpful to share. You know, I have my recovery journey has been a long one, and I'm pretty bullheaded. So for me, I did not grow up in a home where there was substance addiction. I didn't see drugs or alcohol or anything, but I do believe relational addiction for sure. So I came by that naturally. In my experience with substance addiction, my first drug of choice was methamphetamines. and I haven't touched those since I was 19 years old. And I never liked alcohol, but after I quit meth, alcohol became a very best friend of mine. And I quit that when I was 32. And that journey was much harder for me. I did a lot of things trying alone to quit drinking and to quit the addiction. And I learned so much in all of those avenues, but none of them could I use consistently. For instance, yoga or whatever spiritual practice or meditation. I would do them, I'd have some time of sobriety, and then I would relapse. And so none of those things were foundational for me. They couldn't keep me sober, so to speak. And so my journey was really about not doing it alone. I'm not somebody that can do it alone. And again, this is my journey. However you can have recovery in your life is beautiful for you. But my story was, and for whatever, maybe that's the divine plan, because I'm a serial isolationist. Maybe that was the divine plan. You can't do it alone because you have to be around people. So I had to embrace other people in recovery. And for me, 12 steps has been a huge part of my path and something I still love today and I'm very involved in. And it's anonymous, so I'm not really supposed to talk about that, but you're asking about my recovery. So that's a big place where I got help and still get spiritual food. What that did for me was surround me with people that also understood what I've been through and gave me a path of living that works for me on a daily basis. And the biggest thing I can say, and I've heard this in recovery, is that we have a God-sized hole. And the word God offends you. It doesn't mean what it meant to me in childhood, but it's really this, self-soothing. When I talk with other women that I work with around recovery, I say soothers. What soothers are we using? Because for me, it wasn't just one. I want to soothe myself because I'm empty or because I'm not feeling good or because I'm ashamed, whatever, a million reasons. But I just wanted to have that feeling of being soothed. And so for me, I need to soothe myself with life-giving practices. And for me, it's searching out that that there's a bigger thing in the universe than me, so kind of a higher power, so to speak, and relying on that. And for me, it's like picking up a car for me. If I'm trying to pick up a car and that's my addiction and I'm doing that by myself, I'm never going to pick it up. But if I put 20 other people around that car, we can lift that car right off the ground. So that's the best analogy I have for you. So I have to plug into other people. And for me, that's a higher power. Me doing it alone is small, me doing it with others and support. So for me, getting support was huge. Recovery is a way of life for me. So I'm constantly looking at my own inventory, awareness, acceptance, action. Am I aware of what I love in my life? And am I aware of what I don't love? Can I accept that where I'm at today? And then what action do I want to take around it? And this is relationship too. So that to me is substance addiction. And I practiced enough to know that there's, for me, not recovery where I can have a little. There's certain things, if I put them in my body, all bets are off. I tried every way, doing yoga, eating well, blah, 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 have a little, doesn't work for me. So for me, that's a substance addiction, and I just don't put it in my body. It's like a black and white boundary for myself. Then there's process addiction, and that could be the phone, or that could be the, codependency or more love addiction, those kind of things. And again, I'm naming it, I name it to tame it. I only name things not to be negative or I think I'm broken or anything. It's so that I'm aware of what I'm dealing with right now. And then I can accept where I'm at, and then I can take positive action around it. So I like to label things personally. I don't label you, but I like to label my stuff, because then I know, like, oh, that's a hot stove. I don't want to touch that. That's a relationship behavior. If I engage in that, it's going to put me on crazy train. And so that has been very helpful for me. But process addictions for me last a lifetime. I just, I always need to be checking on how am I showing up in relationship? Am I focusing on myself, or am I focusing on you? Am I getting lost in all your drama or your pain or what you're going through, or am I able to stay in my equilibrium and be loving and accepting of wherever you're at in life? And so these are just, ongoing pieces of my recovery. And so I have a spiritual practice that is part of my recovery. I have a way that I take care of myself every day. And when that goes off kilter, I notice it. So I kind of have to, I like to treat my mind, body, spirit. And so that's something I do personally, but I also need to be in touch with other people. And that's part of my recovery.
I think we'll do one last round. And as we go around, I'm going to show where you can get more information about each of these beautiful souls. Something I want to riff on for a moment, is the importance of having a practice. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the importance of a spiritual practice. Right now, I'm probably as busy as I've ever been in terms of so many clients going through really hard times. And I want to say that the people that have a practice, no matter how difficult it is, they're doing okay. They need some support, they need some tools, but having a practice, and it doesn't have to be a religion. It can be, but it can also be meditation, yoga, a martial art form, a musical instrument, some form of exercise or a sport. There's a lot of forms of practice that help us to connect to ourselves, to connect to body, and to connect to that which is greater than ourselves. You might want to call it life, you can call it higher power, God, divinity, that which has 1,000 names. But having a practice is so important. And I want to address that. Yesterday, I was working with an incredibly intelligent man, a very successful business guy. And he used to be very religious. And then he had a big falling out with his church of organized religion and had the pain of a lot of hypocrisy. And so dismissed religion. And in the process, threw the baby out with the bathwater, threw his relationship to divinity out with the religion. And he's going through a particular moment in his life. And I just really went into how important it is to have a spiritual practice and to reconnect in his own unique way to divinity. And he started to cry because he realized how much he was missing that connection. And it was a really powerful moment. I mean, a powerful session. And so I just want to say that so many intelligent people, maybe some of you watching, realized a hypocrisy or had a disillusionment with whatever organization you might have been exposed to or brought up with. But find your own personal connection. Start with a practice. If you've had a practice and kind of put it aside, pick it back up or find a new practice. But it's so important for us to have a practice. And it also then really helps us with our addictions and our compulsions because now we have an alternative. And pick a practice that feels good. Pick a practice that your body likes, right? And so I just really wanted to emphasize how important I think that is. So we'll do one more round. I want to thank everybody who's been watching. Thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie did write something interesting. She wrote, being serious, I recently learned of the category of Heyoka, empath. So I'm showing this tape of you to someone. I've talked to her for decades, and I finally got her to stop trying to fix me and instead work with me. So yes, and we all appreciate the Heyoka, or it might also be called the coyote medicine. And I'll share a humbling moment that I just thought of. Marshall Rosenberg was a very big influence in my life. My life really changed when I was hired to do a series of projects with Marshall. And early on, as he was getting to know me, we traveled for 3 weeks together, staying in hotel rooms together, and I was filming him. As he got to know me, he goes, you know who you are, Scott? You're a fix-it jackal. You think that by fixing everybody, you're making the world a better place, but you're actually a fix-it jackal. And I was totally defensive and hurt, sad, and scared because, of course, he was right. And so it's true, sometimes we have such a desire to care for others, but then we become a fix-it jackal. And I appreciate we've already talked about we can't fix or change anybody. We can only support them. And support is a beautiful thing. All right, last round, we're going to go to our beloved friend, TJ Woodward.
Thank you. I really appreciate that you talked about practice. And I remember one day, and it's one of those moments where I like shot out of bed. Sometimes I'll shoot out of bed and think, oh, I know what I've been saying now. Like I'll get it at a different level. But the word practice stuck out to me because I used to think of practice, like, for example, meditation and mindfulness, which is an important practice for me. I thought it was about the meditation. Like, let me get really good at meditating and then I will be practicing. And something changed within me. And I realized this, I woke up with this question, what are we practicing for? Right. So like if I'm an athlete, which I'm not, but I practice for the game, right? Or if I'm a musician, I practice for the performance. And I realized at that point that I had been thinking that it was about the meditation, but the meditation was actually practicing for a way I can be in the world. And so when I understood that, and I don't mean here, but when I really got that in my body, oh my gosh, every moment is a meditation. And that the practice, if you're doing a practice on a pillow or a yoga practice or whatever your practice is, it's not about that. That is so that we can bring that consciousness into the world. I can bring it into every moment. I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh that said every glance and every moment can be infused with love. And for me, I recognize that it is actually possible to be in that state all the time. I had a client ask me not long ago, well, a few years ago, I actually don't see clients individually anymore, which I kind of miss, but a client asked me, do you really walk around in this state of open-hearted presence, feeling one with everyone and everything all the time? And I paused for a moment and I said, yes, I do, but I don't always remember that I do, right? Sometimes I forget that that's my natural state. And so for me, when I started a conscious path of spirituality, getting sober in 86, starting New Thought in 88, going to India in the early 90s and going to an ashram and practicing all these different paths, I really thought it was about getting somewhere, learning how to. And at some point, I realized that the only path is really back within to the original perfection, right? If I came into this world as a whole and perfect spiritual being, then the practice is about remembering that and knowing that and then bringing that energy into the world, which I get to remind myself moment by moment that that's who and what I am, and that's who and what everyone else is. Someone that has a different political view than I do, someone that has a different point of view about COVID-19 than I do, someone that has a different position around a lot of the topics that we're all working with here in this spectacular transformative year of 2020. I just want to give say for a moment, what if 2020 is the year we've all been asking for, right? Timothy alluded to this, that sometimes in my own suffering, my pain, my own is the rich transformation. And as he so beautifully said, that doesn't mean we have to stay in the suffering, but it's an opportunity, right? And what we're seeing right now is a lot of systems breaking down and a lot of unknown, right? Learning how to be present with the unknown. The reality is we never know. But right now, 2020, it's like we really never know. You know, I was saying before we started the show, like the news of the last 24 hours, I'm like, what? Didn't see that one coming, right? So the practice is the practice of going back to what we've been saying, curious, open, and presence. But the deeper practice is knowing very deeply who and what I truly am, an infinite being, source energy, an emanation, an expression of source energy. And that's the truth for me and everyone else. And when I'm in that vibration, then life is completely different. Nothing needs to change in order for me to be happy. It's when I forget that, which is not if, but when I forget that, I remind myself to come back. And so, Scott, I really appreciate that you're saying that, because we are living in uncertain times. And the truth is, we're always living in uncertain times. You know, the external world does what it does. Things, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a cycle. The way the tide comes in, the tide goes out. When I'm anchored in a greater reality, then I'm able to be with that flow, right? And that, you know, it's perfect for this conversation, because I'm able to allow others to be where they're at, because I get to do that for me. And so it becomes so simple. Do I remember who I am? The practice is remembering that, living from that vibration, and then everything changes. I'm no longer attached to what happens in the world, because I know that there is a changeless dimension within myself.
Thank you so much, TJ. You know, I want to encourage people to go to his website. It's very easy. It's tjwoodward.com. And I feel blessed. I think I got the last train to Clarksville, I guess, because I was blessed to have coaching with TJ every week for, I think it was 13 weeks, and it was life changing. And I really want to encourage people. He's now doing online courses. He's got conscious recovery for individuals, conscious recovery for professionals. You can get his book. His books are wonderful. There's two: Conscious Recovery and Conscious Life, if I recall. And they're both really beautiful. So get the book, get the courses, meet TJ, tjwoodward.com. And really, thank you so much, TJ, for being on our show and blessing us with your wisdom. And may you remember that you're in that state even more.
More and more. Thank you,
More
Scott.
and more. All right. Well, we go to Timothy next for your final thoughts for tonight, Timothy.
I'm really remunerating, or I'm not sure that's the right word, but ruminating, thank you, in what TJ was saying. And I wholeheartedly agree. I'd like to just, for those people who atheism is your primary belief structure, coming into yourself and discovering who you are and what your core values are, how you feel and how you want to be in the world is exactly the same thing he said. So if you were turned off by anything Scott said or TJ said about spirituality and God and my soul essence, let all that go if you need to, and know that what we're all really saying at a fundamental level is just being who we truly are, moment to moment, and an expression of that without limitations of guilt and shame. And the practice, whether it's on the mat, yoga, meditation, or surfboard, or dance, is to be authentic and true to what's alive in you at that moment. And relationships and communication are one of the greatest dojos there are for practicing authenticity. Most of us find in those moments we tend to think, does TJ like me? Is Heidi listening to me right now? Or she, you know, we can get into all these things going on. Well, we're not really in our authentic self in that moment, and we are. And just learning to be with that, and then how do we live with it, will release us typically into more expanded expression of our heart and our love. One of my mantras that's really been important to me lately is my love is greater than my pain. As I was going through cancer, it seemed that pain was greater than love. And what I found was that no, even in the greatest levels of physical and emotional and I'm going to die stories, there was love deep within me at all times. And, you know, now I could spin into, it felt like a quantum field. If we talk physics, it felt like what some call God. It felt like my inner golden being. It was what most people, I think, when we take social conditioning and fantasy off of love. And it's something that we experience deep within us. It was a wholeness, and it was a absolute limitless room of possibilities. And that's what I meant earlier when I said suffering is our greatest gift, because it can help us. I really believe without some suffering or some discomfort, we might not know that aspect within ourselves of deep love. And whatever journey you're on with addiction, codependency, recovery, or just simply being, this practice of learning to feel and be within oneself in some form or another, relationship, meditation, like all the different things I said, is highly recommended. I highly recommend.
Well, I highly recommend people going to your website, Earl Consulting, and it's earl-consulting.com. And you can get a free consultation. I think you probably have gotten a nice taste of all three of these amazing coaches. And I know Timothy does still do coaching work, and has a real long history working with teenagers and young adults, and also parents of teenagers and young adults. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Timothy, and if you want more information, please go to his website. You know, I was reminded as you were talking, Timothy, of a line. Back when I was an actor, one of my favorite roles was I played El Gallo in The Fantastics. And there's a line that goes right along the lines of what you were saying, if I can remember it. There's a curious paradox that no one can explain. Who understands the reaping of the grain? Who knows why spring is born out of winter's labor and pain? Or why we all must die a bit before we grow again? Just thought of that. I haven't thought of that one for a while.
Love it.
All right, we get to go to Heidi next for your final thoughts, Heidi.
Okay. I'm really touched by all that you guys are saying. I'm very present to that right now. So I wanted to say that. I looked up the word recovery. I love to look up words in the dictionary. So recovery is a return to a state of health, mind, or strength. The action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. And I love that. I feel like I got robbed of a lot of things when I was in active addiction. And on Recovery Talk that Timothy and I do at 6 p.m. on Tuesday nights, our kind of, tagline, whatever you want to call it, is connection is the opposite of addiction. And for me, the journey of recovery has been about connection. It has been about finding what was stolen and lost inside myself and coming to a healthy state of mind and strength within myself. So the first connection being with me, and then connecting with spirit or higher power, whatever you want to call it. And then my passion and my love in life is relationships. It's parent-child relationships, it's coupleships. And that's what I really love working with people on, is this idea of intimacy with yourself and intimacy with others. And so my whole recovery journey has been about recovering my ability to connect. And my whole work and passion and research in life has been about helping others connect to themselves and to others. And I think that's just what I wanted to say about recovery and connection. I loved the word, I loved because it kind of riffed on what TJ was saying, was the journey inward to reconnect with, something he didn't say lost, but the recovery word said lost or stolen inside ourselves, and reconnecting with that true essence of who we already are.
Thank you, Heidi. Heidi is also a wonderful, wonderful coach. And you can find her at HeidiLove.com, HeidiLove.com. And Heidi offers a lot of different coaching, individual private sessions. She's very good with couples work, communication, and intimacy. She also has a real background in grief recovery. And there's a lot of that going on. A lot of people are leaving this world, there's a lot of grieving we need to do. So she's an amazing coach, and I highly recommend all three of these beautiful souls. So if you're wanting more support, go to online courses with TJ or private coaching with Heidi or Timothy. I am not taking on new clients at this time. My dance card is full, but I am wanting to always remind people to join us every Friday night for this show, Straight Talk, and every Saturday night. I'm very proud of this show, Saturday night for the Global Peace Tribe. TJ's been on it. And tomorrow night is a really special one. We are going to be focusing on healing the relationship between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And everyone that's on tomorrow night's show has been on the show before. I really called upon, and it's the first time we've done a show with all people returning, because I really wanted to bring in my favorite, and I love everybody who's been on the show, but really people that I really know have a tremendous amount of understanding about this. So we've got John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and he's a wonderful guy. Satyan and Susan Raja, who have been married for 35 years and are the real deal as far as a powerful couple. Another powerful couple, Pato Bantan, who's a great reggae star, and his wife Antoinette. And they're going to talk about their marriage, and they're going to play some music, which is going to be very cool. They're going to do a duet. Eden Amadora, who really understands about the divine feminine. She was a top model at an early age, went through the rigors of it, and then just walked away from that crazy world of glamour and really discovered what it really means to be feminine. My good friend Paul Sterling, who's actually right here in my house tonight, who is a brilliant author. Ariel Brown is going to be with us. And we always have music. These two brothers, Indubious, are going to be playing. Nina Gray, one of our favorite singers. She's just so soulful. And we have magic with the great Teatro. So do join us tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. It's going to be a really good show. And of course, hope to see you all on Tuesday nights for Recovery Talk, Friday nights for Straight Talk. And you can find out everything you need to know by going to the Love Coach Academy page or the lovecoachacademy.com website. I have such respect for each and every one of you. Thank you, and have a beautiful, beautiful weekend. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Share this out. Share this out. Share this with your friends. Good night, everybody.